What is good people? You are now listening to another episode of Since We Last Spoke with Danny Foxworth. I am your humble narrator, Danny Foxworth. This being the last episode of 2024, I want to highlight some of the more memorable moments for me personally from the year 2024. So, a retrospective, if you will. So, we're going to go all the way back to the month of January 3rd to be exact. I was a guest on one of my favorite podcasts called What You've Been Watching. It's hosted by 1/3 of one of my other favorite podcasts, the Firestarter podcast. My man Basa, he hosts it, and we just got to talking about TV programming and movies that we enjoyed watching as kids, and talking about Mama's Family and NFL's Fastest Man competition and NBA Inside stuff and Kung Fu Theater and all kinds of things, and talking about bad Tubi movies and stuff and documentaries. It was a very fun time. So y'all check that episode out. It's on the What You've Been Watching podcast. I think the episode is called Head Full of Heinz. Then January 13th, my parents called me over to their house, and they actually surprised me with a cake and balloons to commemorate the 1-year anniversary of my podcast. Hard to believe we're coming up on 2 years now, man. Time flies, but you lose track of time when you're having fun with it. Then on January 20th of this year, I made the trip down 95 down to Jacksonville and linked up with my guy Joe. He is 1/3 of Random Acts of Podcast, and he does custom rug making. And he had a storefront called the Safe House, and I went there and picked up and bought a rug, and also he was like, yo, you want to try your hand at making your own custom rug? I was like, sure, let's do it. And I did my custom Texas Rangers rug. It's this rug right here. He did some fine tuning to it, but for the most part, I did the heavy lifting, but couldn't have done it without his tutelage. And again, that was an incredible experience. And then the 22nd, what made the January 22nd special is the fact that, I'm at work, I'm on the verge of clocking out. And then I get a DM on Twitter from an unexpected fan. And if you know him in the Charleston area, if you grew up in the Charleston area, you're familiar with the great Dean Stevens. He was the 6 o'clock news anchor on the local ABC News affiliate down here, Channel 4. Actually started in the early 90s as a weekend sports anchor, but he reached out to me. He initially reached out to me because we're both sober, living the sober life. But I guess he got wind of my podcast, and he hit me up, and he was like, man, I'm really enjoying what you're doing with the podcast. Here's my number. Let's talk. So after I clock out, I got in the car and we talked for damn near an hour. And that ultimately led to him being a guest on both At the Plate and Since We Last Spoke. So make sure you check those episodes out, man. He's got an incredible story. And it's wild how friendships can just pop up out of the blue like that. And I'm extremely grateful for our friendship. And I'm going to zoom through February because there really wasn't anything of note that took place during that month. So March 2nd, I happened to be a guest on another one of my favorite podcasts entitled the Hilltop Glove Podcast. And, it was cool because that was actually the first time that I got to sit down in studio and be a guest on a podcast. That was a very unique experience. And I dug that. And we talked about Monk's Corner. We talked about ties to Marion, South Carolina, and sports legends from the state, and how I got into baseball and my inability to hit a baseball and my inability to excel in other sports as well. And that was a lot of fun. Then March 9th, shout out to the homies Rick and his wife Danielle and the homie Ty Will. They come down from Atlanta every year to attend the Charleston Wine and Food Festival. And that Saturday, we always do a bar crawl on King Street. And just being the resident tour guide, it's always fun just hanging out with them the whole day. And then we always have the nightcap down at my favorite spot in Charleston, Local 616, and we watched the Duke North Carolina game there, and North Carolina actually emerged with the victory. So that made the day even better. That just made the day even better. Then I will see y'all in March again in 2025. Now, March 23rd, I made a return trip down in Jacksonville, Florida. This time, I was invited to be a guest on the aforementioned Random Acts of Podcast, and that was a lot of fun too. Talking about growing up amongst Corner, and specifically talking about Bilo and Food Lion and Charlemagne, and we talked about Winn-Dixie, and got to participate in one of my favorite segments on the podcast, which is called Rate That Suit, where they just show videos of people wearing suits, and we just grade them on a scale from 1 to 10. And man, that was like for me, that was a podcast dream come true, because I've been tapped into them really ever since the pandemic. I don't even remember. Well, I remember how I found the podcast, but yeah, always good chopping it up with Amp and Joe. I wish I could have met Devin too, but you know what? It's inshallah, it'll happen. And I got to get them on the podcast too. So shout out to Amp, Devin, and Joe from Random Acts of Podcast. Then 4 days later, on March 27th, I was at a function that they do monthly in Charleston called Woo Wednesday. And it's basically just like the black ass social recharge that I need. And while I was there, I had the pleasure of actually running into my dog Mo, who was one half of one of my other favorite podcasts, the hardest working podcast in the Carolinas. We're Just the Messengers podcast, and just meeting him and chopping it up with him and just talking about how we got our podcast started, and just hearing each other's podcast ideas for future episodes and whatnot. It was a very productive and a very enriching conversation. Then moving on to the month of April 23rd, my inner child had reached its highest peak. I attended the Price is Right live show that was at the North Charleston Performing Arts Center, and man, just getting out the car and walking up to the event, waiting in line, registering, and then getting the gold tag to put on my chest, which I have hung on my wall prominently behind me if you're watching on YouTube. And man, I just could not stop smiling. I mean, when the show started, it was just fun from beginning to end. And the black couple in front of me, it was an older black couple, and her name got called. My name never got called, but I still had a hell of a lot of fun nonetheless. And the lady that was in front of me, her and her husband, she got her name called, and he's just losing his mind. Like, that's my baby. That's my baby. And she was so excited. She went to high five him and accidentally smacked him right across his face. It was hilarious. And he was like, that's my baby. And he turned around. He's like, she smacked the shit out of me just now. And he just busted out laughing. But that was man. If the Price is Right live ever comes to your city, do yourself a favor and please go. Make your inner child happy, because my inner child damn sure was. Then, moving on to the month of May, I had the good brother DJ Wally Sparks on at the plate. Now, how I got hip with Wally, well, how I got became friends with Wally Sparks, rather, it was really organic. I was looking at a tweet of his. Somebody asked, what are the three things you're most passionate about? And he posted the Atlanta Braves, the Tennessee Volunteers, and pro wrestling. I was like, oh, Atlanta Braves. I should reach out to him. And so I was on my lunch break, and I just hit him in the DMs like, yo, I introduced myself, told him about my podcast, and I was like, man, I'd love to have you on so you can just nerd out about all things Atlanta Braves. 2 minutes later, he hits me back. Yeah, let's do it. Set it up. So we made it happen. Actually, he was on this and on Since We Last Spoke. So he's a 2-time guest. But it was super cool just hearing this story about growing up in Chattanooga and playing Little League baseball, and the Little League coach that left an impression on him, and all of his favorite Atlanta Braves memories. And then moving on to May the 2nd, There's another special episode of Since We Last Spoke. I had my longest tenured childhood friend, Liz Rennie. I mean, we go all the way back to First Baptist Daycare. We've literally been friends for 40 years. And it was a lot of fun just having her on the pod and just catching up on lost time and talking about things that happened in grade school. And it got such a great reaction from my classmates. Then the question became from the classmates, so y'all should start your own podcast. Have you ever thought about starting, you and Liz doing a podcast? So I reached out to her and I'm like, would you be interested in doing a podcast? And she was like, sure, let's do it. So once a month we record, and that's how Growing Up Low Country with Liz and Danny was born. And that was, to this day, that's still one of my all-time favorite episodes I've ever done. Then May 10th, another podcast dream come true. I had the two of my biggest podcast heroes, Rod and Karen from the Black Guy Who Tips. I had them on as guests on Since We Last Spoke. Now, how I met them, well, the last meeting prior to recording, I went up to Charlotte because I'm an OKC Thunder fan, and they were playing the Hornets that night. And Rod and Karen go to Hornets games all the time. So we met up at halftime, just shooting the breeze about podcast stuff. And I was like, man, I would love to have you and Karen on. He was like, absolutely, let's set it up. So May 10th, we got the ball rolling and we put the podcast out. And again, that was another one of my favorite episodes, just hearing their stories about growing up in Charlotte and how they met and their fanaticism about the Hornets and their podcast, and Rod being a writer for Bomani Jones's HBO show, Game Theory. That episode is right at around 2 hours. Man, that was a blast. And then the very next day, I got to knock another thing off my sports bucket list. I got to see the Las Vegas Aces play in real life. They had the Aces are my favorite WNBA team, and they had an exhibition match in Colombia at the Colonial Life Arena against the Puerto Rico national team. And getting to see Asia and Kelsey and Chelsea and Sid Colson and just all of my favorite Aces players in real life. That was a lot of fun. And of course, I got to meet up with my homie, friend of the podcast, Brandon Silvers, who's the host of Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers. He follows the Aces too. And unbeknownst to me, one of my best friends from high school, shout out to Jackie Stanley, she was at the game, which took me by surprise because I never knew she was really into women's basketball like that. But hey, you learn something every day. But it was super cool getting to catch up with her. Had a big long hug with her and just catching up on lost time. And shout out to Jackie. I hope you're doing well. And we go to May 13th. May 13th is special for me because it was one of the proudest moments of my life. May 13th, I celebrated 20 years of sobriety. 2-0. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also one of the most beneficial and rewarding things I've ever done. And I got to pat myself on the back because it wasn't easy, especially the first couple months. But I actually did a podcast episode entitled 20 Years of Since We Last Spoke, just chronicling my sobriety journey. Then on May 23rd, I was a guest on the homie Priest Jacobs podcast, Worthy Cause, and we got to talking about growing up in Long Ridge and just living off the land and talking about, preparing roadkill to eat for dinner and the way that we went about doing it. And that was a lot of fun getting to talk about that. And then May 31st, got to meet another internet homie in real life. My homie Zoe, who's this incredible musician. His music is so fire. And him and his band, which consisted of Tall Black Guy and the lead singer, who was Deborah Bond, who's amazing. They had a live show in Columbia, South Carolina. So of course I couldn't pass that up. He's a 2-time guest of the show. Had him on at the plate and Since We Last Spoke. Just getting to chop it up with him in real life prior to the before and after their performance. And we spent a lot of time just talking about bad Tubi movies because that's come to find out, that's our common bond outside of music and baseball. So again, great meeting Zoe in real life. And I encourage you to meet your internet friends in real life because I've yet to have a bad experience in that regard. Then the month of June, and a specific weekend because Father's Day weekend was incredibly special because it was just one event after it was just one milestone after another. The first one is my sister coming home to celebrate with us, and she had a birthday on June 17th. Then my birthday was the next day, June 18th, and then after that we had Father's Day, and then we just had a big celebration. That was super cool. And having family come in from out of town that I met for the first time. Shout out to Martin Mazik and his wife Uma and their daughter Kavia. They flew in from Oakland, and this was my first time meeting Martin. We talked on the internet, and we interacted back and forth over the phone. But just getting to be in him and his family's presence was incredibly special. It was a long time coming, and it did not disappoint, man. It was a lot of fun just talking podcasts and talking hip hop and talking books, talking about macro dosing and micro dosing, and stuff like that. So eventually I'm going to make my way out to Oakland to return the favor, like a home and home series, if you will. And then moving to July 24th, the good brother Sky Zoo made an announcement on IG a few days prior to the event that he was going to be in Charleston. It was him and Talib Kweli and a couple of other acts to perform at the Charleston Poorhouse. And of course, I'm gonna stop everything I'm doing to go see my dog Sky Zoo because we've literally known each other since we were kids. His grandmother lived like a couple streets down from me, and he would always come down from Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, to stay with her in the summer and just run the streets with us. So it was cool. And then he hit me up because the last time I saw him was actually also at the Charleston Poorhouse about 6 or 7 years ago when he was touring for his album. And I had a shirt that I made that said Long Ridge across the chest. And he was like, yo, that's a dope shirt. I was like, man, I'll make you one. So I made him one and sent it to him. Then fast forward to this past July, he was like, yo, I'm on tour right now. We're about to head to Charleston. I wonder, do you have any of those Long Ridge shirts hanging around? Because the one that you gave me, I left at the crib and I can't get it. I was like, yeah, I got you, man. Don't worry about it. So I hit him up when I get to the venue, and then we chop it up, and then I give him the shirt. Sure as shit. When it's time for him to hit the stage to perform his music, he's wearing my shirt, and man, you could not wipe the smile off my face. So I'm like, he's rapping. Let's go. Man, and so we got to chop it up a little bit more after the event, and we set it up, and I was like, yo, I'd love to have you on the podcast. And sure enough, we made it happen. And that was another one of my most favorite episodes that I've ever done. Just hearing him talk about his experience, the adjustment from Brooklyn to Long Ridge, and hearing how he got into music and getting his discography and ghostwriting for other artists, and his love for the New York Knicks and his passion for cooking. So y'all make sure y'all check that out. The name of that episode is Go to the Rucker and Earn Your Nickname. So it was great to have Sky Zoo on. Then to the month of August, Tropical Storm Debbie just took her sweet, slow ass time moving through the low country. And when she left, she dropped 22 and a half inches of rain on the town of Moncks Corner. It was bad. I mean, it was bad. It was a lot worse than I thought it was going to be. While it was happening, it seemed like it was just a light to moderate rain. It was to the point I just sat on the porch and just took everything in. It was just a slight breeze, and I was like, man, this is nice. And then I went to bed, not realizing that the intensity had increased overnight. And when I got up the next morning and opened my back door, and I could not believe it. My back porch legit looked like an infinity pool. I had never in my life seen that much rain ever, 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 ever. And then on top of that, it was a tornado that spawned in Moncks Corner that tore up an Arby's. And I think they're about done with the repairs on that Arby's. But yeah, that was a wild day. August 9th. Then August 18th, I took a trip out to Cincinnati. Mainly the main reason why I went is because I wanted to see my favorite MLB, one of my favorite MLB players is a Cincinnati Reds infielder by the name of Ellie De La Cruz, man. He's lightning in a bottle. And just getting to see him play, that was a lot of fun. And Great American Ballpark, that's a super nice ballpark. And the tickets are fairly reasonable too. I sat in the outfield. I was like 2 rows from the outfield wall. My ticket was like $23. I mean, you can't beat that. Then I got to sink my teeth into some Skyline chili again, which I get it's an acquired taste, but I can't get enough of that stuff, man. It's incredible. And prior to the game, just walking around the city, taking the light rail to Finley, hitting the Finley Market, which was incredible, and going to the Cincinnati Art Museum, which was amazing. They had a dope hip hop photography exhibit there. And yeah, Cincinnati, you got my heart. And then fast forward to September. It's September 7th. I took a trip to Pittsburgh to knock the top item off my sports bucket list, which was to attend a Pittsburgh Pirates game at PNC Park. Pictures don't do it justice. Seeing it in live and in living color, it is, brother. Even if you're not a fan of baseball, I recommend taking a trip to PNC Park to see Pirates game just for the views alone. I mean, it's breathtaking. You got the 3 yellow bridges that contrast with the skyline of Pittsburgh in the back. It's awesome. And then I got to have some Permane Brothers, have my first Permane Brothers sandwich, which was really good. And just as fun was the fact that I got to reunite with one of my favorite high school classmates, Victoria Bennett Byer. She had been living in Pittsburgh going on 15 years now, and I legit had not seen her since we graduated high school, which is coming up on 27 years. So she actually picked me up from the airport, and we went to the Andy Warhol Museum, and just getting to see all of his works, because he's one of my all-time favorite artists. And that was just so cool. It's the whole museum. It's like literally 7 floors of nothing but his work. And again, if you're in Pittsburgh, I highly recommend hitting up the Andy Warhol Museum. Then also, October, moving on to October, the October 6th, I got to meet 2 internet friends in real life. My dog, Sed Warren, and my dog, Sean, aka Orangeburg Slim. Both of them live in Columbia. I went up there to do an episode. Well, Sed and I met up at the Richland Public Library, and we knocked out an MLB playoff preview episode of At the Plate. And that was super cool. I had him on the podcast a couple times before, but this was my first time meeting him in person. And then after we finished recording, we left the library. Probably about 2 or 3 blocks away is my homie Priest Jacobs has an art gallery called Soul House, and he had a vinyl pop-up. So we went there, and I met up with Orangeburg Slim, who's a vinyl aficionado like myself. And prior to us meeting, I promised him that whenever we meet, I will have I'll have a Phaso Phaso vinyl for him that he's been looking for that I happen to have. I was like, you know what? Here, just as my gift to you, just for being such a solid homie. And I had him on the pod once before too. I got to get him back on the pod. But that was a fantastic day. And Chef Hector Sanchez was holding it down on the outside of the gallery, chefing up his pizza pies and stuff. That was an incredible day. And then the month of November 16th, the homie Chef Amethyst Ganaway from North Charleston's own, she does a monthly event at the South Carolina State Museum called Harvesting Heritage, and basically highlights the culinary traditions and the culinary traditions of black folks in different parts of the Carolinas. So you had the upstate, you had the Midlands, and you had the PD, and you had the Low Country. And for this one that I attended, this was actually the first one I attended. It was spotlighting the upstate, specifically the Appalachia portion of South Carolina. It was it was a lady on the panel who was from a place I wasn't familiar with called Liberia, South Carolina, which was it was a predominantly black area back then. And she, I can't remember the name of the church, but she's a deaconess at the church, and she's a historian documentarian for that town of Liberia. And it was just an awesome history lesson. Them fighting off Klansmen, and the church burning down, and them having enough produce and enough crops to sell, and the amount of money that they made off of the crops they sold allowed them to rebuild the church that the Klan had burned down. And it was an awesome experience. And then after the panel, then went to the dining room and just had an amazing feast. It was chicken and collard greens and mac and cheese, and that bread pudding was, oh my God, that bread pudding was out of this world. So shout out to Amethyst. She's really, 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 really doing her thing. And then November 21st, I had the honor of being a guest on At the Table with Chef Jay. And At the Table with Chef Jay, the premise is a web series, and the premise is the guest that she has on, you cook a meal that reminds you the most of your childhood. And the meal that I prepared was shrimp and grits, because first time I had it was I was 9 years old, and my Uncle Carl prepared it. And ever since then, I've been trying my hand at preparing the shrimp and grits the same way he did. And once I finally got it down pat, it was right around the same time my mom was like, all right, you're on shrimp and grits duty for the holiday dinner. And I was like, all right, bet. And then just seeing the amount of positive feedback I got from my meal, that felt good. And it reassured me that I was on the right path with getting my shrimp and grits game tight. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. I love talking to her. I love being on her podcast because she's equally as inquisitive as I am. And she just always has this personality of, it's really bubbly personality, but she's just always curious about what makes people tick and why people prepare the food the way that they do. And it was awesome. And then December hasn't quite happened yet, but I would be remiss if I did not shout out my parents, Myron and Ronnie Foxworth, because this Sunday, December 22nd, it will mark 50 years of marriage for the two of them. And I tell you what, I could not ask for a better set of parents. I love them to death. They're just the most caring, and just, I can't even think of the superlatives to say about them right now. Just, they mean the world to me. They really do. And to see them remain married for 50 years, man, that's half a century. That's so hard for me to wrap my mind around. But yeah, they get all the kudos, and I cannot wait until Sunday, and then they can really and truly just feel the love. And my sister's coming in town, and I'm looking forward to that and Christmas. So yeah, this has been a really good 2024. There's peaks, there's been valleys, but you know what? The valleys, I don't consider the valleys as losses. I only consider those as learning experiences. And hopefully I'll carry that not even hopefully, I will carry that momentum into 2025, because I got a lot of plans and things that I want to do in 2025, and a lot of things to knock off the bucket list that I want to get done. So with that said, this has been another episode of Since We Last Spoke with Danny Foxworth. Thank y'all so much for just sticking with me and listening and watching. Make sure you like, download, and subscribe. Tell a friend about the podcast. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can find my YouTube channel at Danny Foxworth 843. You can find my IG also at Danny Foxworth 843. Yeah, I'm just trying to make it easy for y'all to get access to me. And also, I just launched an email. So if you have any questions or comments or feedback regarding any of my podcasts, just go to foxworthpodcast@gmail.com. That's FOXWORTH podcast@gmail.com. just make sure that whatever the particular podcast that you're listening to that you want to email about, just leave the podcast in the subject header, and I will respond in kind. So again, thank you all for listening. And this has been another episode of Since We Last Spoke with Danny Foxworth. And until next time, y'all be good. See you in 2025. Peace.